All right, this is KhoodeelaarTV television channel being broadcast and streamed online only on the internet. It's a KhoodeelaarTV television channel dedicated to the baby angel Geronimo. Justice for baby angel Geronimo, including the campaign for justice for Sabina Nessa. There's Sabina Nessa. And so this is being run by the Sunday Times on the theme of violence against women, gender violence against women and young girls and young women in the main, but they're not mentioning racism. It is quite possible that race-related crimes and violence and murders are being left out by the persons who are leading the agenda on the campaign about the safety of women. It is very important to understand the points that we have made and the points that will remain absolutely relevant and central. The agenda about the description of Sabina Nessa's murder as a killing. This is something that gives the clear proof that those in the Fleet Street and in the counterparts and broadcasting counterparts like the BBC, Sky News, ITV, that they are following a narrative to create what remains of society, create an atmosphere or readiness on the part of society, on the public, to accept a lower kind of level of action and prosecution and penalty for the murderer of Sabina Nessa. This is the one that we have noticed, and we are repeating that an agenda is being prepared, a subtle agenda narrative being promoted to underplay or downplay the seriousness and the gravity of the murder of this young person, 28-year-old Sabina Nessa. And we say that in full knowledge of the fact that we ourselves wish and still wish Sarah Everard peaceful, eternal peaceful rest for eternity. That violence, murder, rape, kidnapping of women, those are not being prevented and the perpetrators are not being given the full weight of consequences that they deserve. We are aware of the fact that there is no kind of capital punishment, as they say. This is the sun on Sunday. We're just putting this on the record, but we will be not running this kind of items in the future. We shall be running pictures of the victim, Sabina Nessa, but we shall not be running pictures of the suspect or suspects, and we shall not be running any copy or statement. We shall not be repeating statements about the speculations. Essentially, we shall be focusing on the culture. We shall be focusing on the culture of confidence that criminals obviously feel. And that culture is not something that is addressed even by the observer of the Sunday Times that are running some in-depth pieces. And here is the piece that the Sunday Times is running, and there is a shorter version of this one, that the Sun is running on page 16. Now that headline and the concept of diverse background police is based on the assumption that the fact that a particular group of police persons are from diversity background, like African or Asian backgrounds, that fact alone or significantly or as a serious factor plays a role protecting potential victims of violence or potential victims of racist crimes. And the fact that they have put this diverse scope failed, police chief struggling to recruit black officers. Now that is an incomplete statement of what is happening. Why are police chiefs struggling to recruit black officers? That question is not going to be answered in the copy underneath this heading. And let's see what the copy says. And it says that 22 forces, because in England and Wales, England normally includes Wales. So the 22 forces, that is 22 police forces, employ just 89 black officers, which means around one black officer in 450. Cleveland, Northumbria, and Durham have a combined total of just 4 black officers. So Home Secretary Patel will be dismayed by the figures. And it says, Detective Inspector N.D. George of the National Black Police Association said, until we reach out and stop being defensive over emotive issues such as stop and search, recruitment will not increase. Latest statistics show 14% of the population is from the ethnic minority, compared with 7.6% of police. Now, this is a piece by somebody called David Wooding. Now, David Wooding used to work for the News of the World that Rupert Murdoch scrapped in 2011 in the wake of the $1 phone hacking that triggered the appointment by David Cameron of the Levison inquiry. Now, David Wooding is not just a journalist, he is a leading member of the Murdoch operation. And he has platforms on the BBC, on Sky News, and other places here on which, under the guise of reviewing the newspapers, he actually represents a political narrative and agenda. And the fact that he has written this piece about diverse cop fail and the contents of it shows that he is in denial, as is his politics. And this Sunday's coverage of the murder of Sabina Nessa has been taken over by the concern about the attacks on women. And the emphasis is significantly less on Sabina herself as the victim of the murder than on the collective phrase and the slogan that murders like hers represent a pattern about women being targeted. Well, that cannot be the case. That cannot be the truth, because every crime like the murder of Sabina Nessa has got a whole series of unique factors involved. So to reduce the murder to a statistical phenomenon rather than the actual targeting of the victim is in itself irresponsible, and it is in denial. Because the murders of people in London, for example, have been committed by young black man against young black man and against other young black targets. These are not to do with gender, and these are very serious and worrying perpetrations about the perception of the murderers, about the humanity and the rights of the victims of the murders. So what I'm saying is that this statistical rendering is irresponsible, and it doesn't actually challenge the status quo, the culture that allows murderers to do these kind of crimes. What I'm saying is that the media is responsible for underplaying murders like this, crimes like this, except when something like a murder happens and for a variety of reasons the vigil took place, but the vigil didn't take place immediately. The vigil took place a week after Sabina Nessa was murdered. In the perpetration of the crimes themselves, and in the kind of perception that the intending murderer or murderers might be aware of the culture of leniency. In order to actually replace the leniency, a number of things have to be happening. First of all, there has to be democratic accountability by the local councils. As we have said yesterday and day before, there has been no mention. There has been no mention directly by the incumbent in the corrupt post of elected mayor in Lewisham. That individual has not featured in any publicly accessible UK-wide platform where the Sabina Nessa murder has been being reported. So the perpetrator, the murderer of Sabina Nessa, assuming that murderer themselves is a resident of Lewisham or is very familiar with the area. So they would be also familiar with the absence of any public warning, educational kind of announcement against crime and criminality, whether it's gender-based or otherwise. And in the local so-called media, as well as in Fleet Street, there is no narrative. There is no regular references to the continuing, ongoing occurrences of murders and violence. As I said, this particular item is being given that kind of space by the Sunday paper like the Sunday Times, which is an exception. The norm is to ignore murders taking place. And the other thing is that although they are comparing Sabina Nessa's murder with the murder in March this year of Sarah Everard, that comparison and that kind of similarity are being made based on the gender of the two women. Now, That is true, that is factually true, that is factually correct. But there is no mention of the other factors. As I said before, each crime is unique in many ways, although not in every sense, because the murder of Sarah Everard is like the murder of Sabina Nessa, in the sense that both were murdered, both lost their lives. But the various factors in the steps taken by the murderer or murderers up to the point of the committing the murder and the concealment, these are unique. As in the case of the agenda that we have said, the factor of ethnicity, faith. For example, when there is a culture in the media where it says that Boris Johnson's clear statement condemning the Muslim women wearing the burqa, it was supported by the media. It was supported by Fleet Street and by the rest of the media. Johnson remains unapologetic. And just as in the case of the other unfitness for purpose behavior by Johnson, all objections to his incitement to hatred against Muslim women, all objections, scientific, rational, reasonable, social, humanitarian, etc., and compassionate, all objections to Boris Johnson's contempt towards Muslim women and incitement of hatred and intolerance against Muslim women all his statements have remained on the record and he is not apologized. Now, what that means is that any potential murderer of a Muslim woman, now if the murderer perceived Sabina Nessa as a Muslim woman, we don't know at this stage yet, at least I don't know, whether what headgear she was wearing, if she was wearing any headgear. But if her murderer targeted her over whatever length of time he targeted her, if even for a split second of that duration he actually interpreted her or saw her as an easier target for murder because she appeared to be Muslim, then it cannot be ruled out of the possibility that what Boris Johnson did and what Boris Johnson actually reiterated when he was asked to withdraw and apologize. Now that is a factor that we don't know the details of, but a perception that it is fair game. The Muslim women are fair game for murder and violence and attacks and mocking and ridicule. So that is not something that has been included in any way in any of the Fleet Street papers, and we diagnose them as having left all of that out because they're racist and they're persisting in anti-Muslim denial of the Muslim women and Muslim woman, in this case, Sabina Nessa. Now, moving on to there is a list of things that the Observer piece, I think, has in one paragraph of that kind of special report. That one paragraph actually refers to the courts, the councils, the police, the court system. Let's see what the Observer actually has been saying about the So the Observer piece is using Sabina to make a pattern kind of set of demands rather than expressing focused outrage and campaigning demand for justice for Sabina Nessa. There is this and they've got almost the same amount of references to Sarah Everard to the references to Sabina Nessa. So this is a racist denial of Sabina Nessa by the Observer and by the Sunday Times and the others, because although they haven't published, the mainstream haven't published the accounts about any racist motive or race-related motive behind Sabina Nessa being targeted for murder. It is absolutely clear that the murder had race-related kind of motivation among the other motivations. I'm looking for the access to the piece in the Observer, which actually refers to various factors that the piece correctly claims are involved or included in the list of things that influence the culture. Influences the culture that encourages So what happens when the various steps are examined? For example, the police behavior and the police interpretation of the gravity of the crime, that is including the involvement of the Crown Prosecution Service. Now that is one level. The other level is the attitude of the various members of the bureaucracy in the courts. Do the members of the court bureaucracies treat an Asian victim of a murder and an African victim of a murder and a white victim of a murder in the same way, with the same seriousness? Now that has implications for the behavior of the members of the judiciary, because they work together and there is a kind of outlook and an attitude. For example, if the briefing by the non-judicial administrative staff dealing with the paperwork and the use of the language and the preparations, if they reflect the racist bias, treating the African and Asian victim as warranting and as being entitled to less importance being paid to them by the judiciary, then the judiciary do pay to white victims. That has to be brought into the equation. And the fact that there are this word diversity is a suspect word. Diversity to deliver what? Diversity in the police, meaning African and Asian origin persons being members of the police. What do they deliver? And what criteria of accountability for their attitude towards Black, Asian, African, Muslim persons in the population? Who audits them? Who actually examines their behavior as a matter of regular, normal behavior? There is no auditing by the ordinary, normal members of the population. So the nearest that the behavior of the police in dealing with crime or in getting involved in crime, for example, as the observer refers to the murder in Haque of the black man Rogan in 2011, which led to the temporary riots. So the court, the media, the police, and then there is the question of the local council. As I have said, Lewisham Council's elected mayor post holder has still not made it in any papers or any features that are being carried in the Fleet Street papers. This is the Sunday Times. You can't access this online because you have to pay. This is called paywall. So we buy the paper and get these two pieces. One is Patel admits women have been let down. It's like a footnote. It's like a footnote. It's not really the central piece warranting the full attention of the Home Office. Now, there is a reference also in the Observer piece to the way that violence against women is treated less seriously than a terrorist violence or incident. Now, that is a very significant and interesting comparison by the Observer. You use the word terror or terrorism in anything, and it becomes exceptionally high profile. Even though, and this is strictly factual, the impact of the particular terrorism-related incident does far fewer kind of damages to individuals or society than the massacres that are allowed to take place of victims of crime, because there are literally thousands of people are being murdered every year by ordinary, just to use that expression, ordinary criminals and ordinary crimes perpetrators. Now, the Mail on Sunday is part of the Daily Mail group. It has got a magazine exclusive, which is headed The Secret Life of Sophie Ellis Baxter, a horrifying sexual assault, an abusive ex, why the pop star is opening up about her painful past. So this is a This is a magazine piece exclusive about a woman being the target of violence by men. And she says that. And she is, of course, featured on the front page there. And of course, and Grant Sharps, a self-employed, self-confessed liar, is saying that truck drivers can get as much as 70,000 pounds. So this is the version on Sabina on page 18. The version on page 18 of the Mail on Sunday. The online version is probably longer than this. And Sabina is, of course, consistently referred to as a very popular, caring teacher at the school where she taught for a year. She taught for just over a year after qualified to teach, qualified in 2020. A teacher at the school said, the year 2 pupils who Sabina taught last year in year 1 will be the most upset, and their parents. It's hard for teachers to reassure children who are nervous about being at school for the first time while they're putting on a brave face, while consumed with grief themselves. Sabina left her flat in Kidbrooke to meet a man for a first date at the nearby depot bar at around 8:30 p.m. on Friday, September 17. She never arrived there. Her body, which had been covered with leaves, was found the following evening by a dog walker near the open space community center in Cator Park, less than 500 yards from Sabina's front door. So, of course, the main question is, why was she targeted and why was she murdered? 500 yards, it's just minutes walk from her front door. So we are going to show or carry less of the items from Fleet Street papers, and we're going to concentrate on the culture. And the culture includes the behavior of the elected members of parliament. We noticed only one member of parliament actually tweeted after she attended the vigil on Friday, 2 days ago. And she's probably she's probably a year or two younger than Sabina Nessa herself. Zara Sultana. And she too kind of repeated the line, the agenda of using Sabina Nessa as a statistic. And this piece about climate change is written by a allegedly former communist, Peter Hitchens. The Hitchens is having a go at the campaigners campaigning for action on climate change. And there is a piece in the Mail on Sunday on page 37 where this looks like a mixed race woman, African and white mixed race, called Rebecca Ferguson. She reveals the terrifying warning after she accused mystery music boss of sexual harassment. Singer Rebecca Ferguson last night said she was warned that she could be murdered after telling police she was sexually harassed by a senior figure in the music industry. She said it was recently suggested to her by a friend in the industry that she should fear for her life after speaking out earlier this year. Someone close to someone very important in the industry contacted me and said, "I have been worried about you. I thought they were going to kill you," Miss Ferguson told the Mail on Sunday. And this is the kind of ongoing narrative about women being harassed, sexually harassed, and threatened and murdered. So here is a piece about the writer Roald Dahl and one of his granddaughters, Phoebe Dahl, where she's shown in a picture that fits the caption. Roald Dahl's stunning granddaughter Phoebe. Now, so that is the other side. On the one hand, there are selected kind of confessionals, like this one by this particular individual, Sophie Ellis Baxter. And there are every single week, there are dozens of detailed, elaborate pictures promoting the what is becoming now the direct pornographic lives of the various so-called stars. In fact, the Sun is now saying, or quoting one woman saying, that sex should be talked about openly and indulged in openly, which suits the Sun absolutely fine. Now there is a heading here in the Daily Star, which on page 8 is a very short piece about Sabina Nessa. And the heading is the one that we are referring to here. The cops need to do more for women. Well, that is factual enough, but that is wrong. Because that suggests that police exist to do whatever to serve the needs of those who other than women. That's not the case. The police should be judged and interpreted and assessed and audited and held to account for their behavior in serving women as well as men. The fact that this is the heading and the fact that those pieces, as I have been holding to the camera, these pieces are in the papers, and the contents shows that rights of women to be free and safe in their life in society is still being treated as something of a kind of footnote. It's not the central thing. Rights of women should not be subject to a kind of conditional, exceptional debate. It should be the centerpiece. And the fact that the Star has got this idiotic front page splash about the moron Eamon Holmes, and then there are 2 pages, almost 2 pages, and you see the domination. This is This is the piece. Now this is side, this side. This is the piece, very tiny piece about Sabina Nessa. And the 2 pages are about Eamon Holmes. Now that shows the idiocy of the Fleet Street Papers. I mean, they've got 2 pages on Eamon Holmes and one part of a column, single column, about the murdered teacher Sabina Nessa. Well, that is physically the evidence of the stupidity that encourages reducing women's rights and women's experiences to a small footnote compared to the idiocies of Eamon Holmes and Pierce Moron that are given the dominant place and the dominant space by Fleet Street. Now, moving away from the actual immediate events concerning the murder of Sabina Nessa, what kind of knowledge did Sabina Nessa actually have about her environment, her kind of area where she had the flat in Lewisham? Of course, she is from Bedfordshire, where she grew up, but in the actual immediate surroundings, what information would she and others in her position, that is to say, a young woman of her background and her identity, what were the information that she would have been able to access or be aware of? One of her friends, or one of her close friends or acquaintances has been reported as saying that she was a news junkie or a colleague in the school, that Sabina Nessa was a news junkie, that is to say, she would follow the news and want to know about the world. Now, as we have noticed about the role of the London mayor, or the role of the incumbent in the corrupt post of London mayor, Sadiq Khan, during the height of the coronavirus pandemic, when a lot of basic services and facilities and amenities needed to be made available to people, ordinary people in London, there has been nothing. So I can say today, 26th of September 2021, that on the London transport, or the Transport for London, as it is falsely elevated, because it is not transport for London. Most of the bus drivers, because remember the buses don't have any conductor, so the drivers are in control, full control of the vehicle. Most bus drivers in London, based on the experience of, large numbers of anecdotal evidence, most bus drivers in London appear to be uneducated about their role as bus drivers. That is to say, as providers of a service that affects safety and well-being of the people who use the service, that is, who get on the bus and stay on the bus for the duration of their kind of travel to the destinations. That is generally the case. The secondary thing is, many of the drivers let's say belonging to a particular racial group are very hostile to people of a particular other racial background. Now that shows it's irresponsible, it's dangerous, and it's really a violent kind of unfitness on the part of the bus drivers. And as Sadiq Khan, the incumbent in the corrupt post of elected mayor at the expense of London, is also the executive boss of Transport for London, this state of affairs contributes to the culture of impunity assumed by service providers who fail or refuse to provide the service. Every year it should be to hundreds of thousands of users of the bus network. This is something that is never discussed, let alone investigated, by Fleet Street or their counterparts, Sky News or BBC or ITV or Channel 4 News, or Channel 4 as a so-called kind of alternative to the pre-Channel 4 channels. And there is no culture in the media of ordinarily reporting on the thousands and thousands of discriminatory, biased decisions by the magistrates court, by the crown courts, which are the next tier in the criminal legal system, next tier above the magistrates court, and in the county courts and the various divisions or divisional courts, Queen's Bench Division and others. Queen's Bench Division in the High Court is numerically the largest court bureaucracy. There is no culture in the courts of recognizing society. There is no culture in the courts of respecting vulnerable people. And most women, in the context of this coverage and the narrative contained in the Sunday Times and the Observer, are vulnerable, are to be treated as vulnerable. So, once again, to recap, the media don't report anywhere near adequately enough or consistently enough the dominant culture of violence against women that this society allows. The elected members of the local councils are politically dead, and they're deader in 4 of London boroughs, including Lewisham, where there are inflictions of elected mayor. Where there is an elected mayor inflicted on a council, the so-called elected councillors are treated as absolutely dead, absolutely, completely declared as dead. And the crook, every elected councillor, every elected mayor post holder is a crook by definition. And in the case of tar hamlets, for example, these post holders, first Luther Roman and now John Biggs, are on the facts crooks, criminals, and wrongdoers. Despite the evidence that they are criminals, unfit, and wrongdoers, none of the elected councillors raises a question for these criminal incumbents to answer. Despite slogans to the contrary, during the 5 calendar years that Luther Roman was in post, in the corrupt post, and he was corrupt himself, Luther Roman was not subjected to any serious questioning by any of the councillors, even the councillors that carried the Labour Party card and not any connection with Luther Roman's gang of councillors. I say gang because they behaved as gang. They didn't behave, weren't behaving as councillors, as accountable, transparent, democratic, elected post holders with any recognition for the people that elected them, let alone any respect for the people who elected them. And there is nothing ongoing anywhere in England and Wales for holding gender-based criminals to definitive account so that they never commit gender-based crimes again in their life. There is no evidence that any movement exists like that, with any traction, what in other words is called any teeth. There is nothing that exists. And despite the pretensions to the contrary, the academic institutions, as I've said before about the state of justice and the state of darkness that this country has been plunged in for too long. There is nothing in the Russell group of universities or any other group of universities or equivalent academic sort of institutions about rights, about justice, about accountability, about fairness, and about democracy. And everything in this country is obsolete. The courts are obsolete and they need to be replaced. The police is obsolete and it's not functioning. And contrary to the slogan and cheap slogan that the Daily Mail group has about the chief of the Metropolitan Police, the current chief of the Metropolitan Police is Cressida Dick. It's not just Cressida Dick that is not functioning, that is not working. The entirety of the Metropolitan Police is in very urgent need of replacement, A to Z, as is the rest of the police bureaucracies, 26 others or 27 others or 25 other police forces across England, and let's say Wales as well. And the same applies to the local councils that should be scrapped. The councils are not functioning. Ordinary councils, even the ones without the imposition, infliction on them of the corrupt post of elected mayor, they're not working. And the ones that have the corrupt post of the corrupt mayor inflicted on them are completely, absolutely dead. So look at the piece in the Observer about the need for court system and the police and the councils doing their bits to stop violence against women. That is a very stupid piece in the Observer, typical of the Observer, because it doesn't demand the replacement of the courts, the corrupt court bureaucracies. It doesn't demand the replacement of the police, and it doesn't demand the replacement, scrapping of the democratically dead elected councils. And that is based on all of this that I have said so far in diagnosing the media and the Fleet Street. All of that is based on their main, what is called their staff writers and staff writers authored pieces. I've not talked about the so-called letters pages, the opinion pages that are supposedly the platforms where readers have their say. The readers are not having their say. The readers on the Times, the Sunday Times, the Daily Mail, whatever, for a start, they are very small number. There is very small amount of space given to so-called readers. But even in that small space, they're hardly given the actual freedom or access to tell the truth about what is going on in society, what is wrong with society. So if we are going on to the other aspect of justice, which is the baby angel Geronimo. Geronimo has been targeted for, let's say, 4 calendar years for complete criminally perpetrated untruths about the state of the baby angel Geronimo, who is fit, absolutely healthy, perfectly healthy, and totally innocent to the level of an angel. And yet there has been no outcry in the Fleet Street, in Parliament, in the local council, in the area where Geronimo has been living. And there is not a squeak of expression of concern by the Member of Parliament for the constituency, for baby angel Geronimo's constituency. So these are not fictional statements. These are not guesswork. This is absolutely fact-based assertions that I make. And I'm making these assertions about a country whose international kind of propaganda stance is made of claims that it is the country which has the mother of democracy or mother of parliaments, which is the Palace of Westminster. Forgetting the fact that not 1 year, 2 years, 400 years ago, a British campaigner wanted to destroy the Palace of Westminster, which is the House of Commons and House of Peers, because of the criminal role against the people played by the House of Commons and the House of Peers. So that was 400 years ago. Not an Afghan Taliban or an Al-Qaeda from Saudi Arabia. It was 400 years ago. And it was a guy who wanted to blow up the Palace of Westminster because of its criminal role. So when the Sunday Times carries news reviews like this one, this becomes completely ridiculously offensive, outrageously irrelevant, because it is such a shallow piece. It doesn't talk about the role of the police, it doesn't talk about the role of the Crown Prosecution Service, and it doesn't talk about the truth, the truthful behavior of the courts bureaucracies, which are corrupt, which are racist, which are ignorant. So the courts are not doing it. The elected councillors are not doing anything. The elected MPs are not doing anything. And the overhyped, intellectually superior universities, academic institutions are not doing it. For example, at the height of the anti-Muslim propaganda around that arose from the discovery of the fact that mainly Pakistani origin young men in the northern areas of England had been grooming mainly white girls whom they sexually groomed, targeted, and abused and violated. So that gave rise to the questions about culture and what the factors were that allowed them to do that, for as long as they did that. And the role of the councils became an issue to those who actually were treated as experts. But these people were less experts, and they were more anti-Muslim agitators looking for excuses to find any pretext which they could then use against the ordinary population, Muslim population, which they did. Because the actual data of sex groom or sexually grooming abusers showed that there were far too many white groomers than there were groomers that were born into Pakistani background families. And the media, the Fleet Street, and the BBC and the others didn't challenge in their own coverage of the sex gangs. So the perception persists about the ethnicity of criminals and the ethnic background of the criminals and the correlation between the ethnic and faith in this case, because the Pakistani reference actually spreads into the Pakistani nationality and the Pakistani faith, which is ordinarily assumed to be Muslim. And what then happened was that after the kind of topical exploitation of the Pakistani element in the groomers' background, the issue was sunk and hidden by the Fleet Street, even the ones that actually overdid the anti-Muslim and anti-Pakistani background criminals. And that is not referred to in the Sunday Times or the Observer or the Daily Mail on Sunday or the Sun on Sunday piece, which shows that generally violence against women will not be stopped very fast, because they are not actually treating this as a life and death, life-threatening phenomenon. And that is obvious in the fact that they're treating Sabina Nisa's murder as part of the statistics to promote a gender-centric narrative, which will not remotely stop the violence, because it has to be the individual whose life has been taken away from them. And that focus is not there. So that is not exceptional. That is the part of the pattern of the behavior of Fleet Street, which is ignorant, which is insincere, which is dishonest, which doesn't really respect democracy, accountability, and most certainly doesn't care about justice, which is what has been seen for the last 4 years plus in Fleet Street's complicity with the narrative promoted by the depraved Boris Johnson fronted cabal, which has got the depraved behavior by DEFRA. Ordinary crimes and criminality are assumed to be committed by people not in government, not by governments. And yet in the depraved DEFRA's years of conspiracy, it has been the government that has been conspiring, breaking the law, and inciting hatred against baby angel Geronimo. Now we shall be looking at all of those in part 2 today, whenever we broadcast it. In fairness to the topic, to the issue, we shall be devoting the part 2 to the examination of the lies of DEFRA, the depraved DEFRA against baby angel Geronimo. So we shall be calling this one, we shall end this particular edition, part A, and we shall be detailing the updates on our examination of the evidence about baby angel Geronimo. In part B, we shall be bringing this edition A to an end at approximately 9:17 GMT on Sunday the 26th of September 2021.